So last night, Saturday night, about 7:30, Rose Wood went home to God. And I see her son, Stephen, and his wife, Donna, here. You guys have been stepping up to the plate. A job well done. Beautiful, beautiful. She was ready to go. Here's your homework, okay? And we're looking at Saturday, November the 9th at 11 o'clock in the morning for the Mass of the Resurrection for your mom. Okay, so we're going to remember Rose in our prayers. And before us here is the All-Direct and Tempest family. Jean Tempest went home to God, and we all know Jean, the editor of the Granite State News, and when I first got here, she was the president of the parish council and a member of the choir, and so she has 8 children, right? Eight children, mother of 8 children. So they asked if they could come together this morning, and I'm going to bless the urn with Jean's ashes at the end of the Prayer of the Faithful, and then you're going to be going down to Pennsylvania. Is that where the committal is going to be, in the Keystone State? But we're very grateful to your mother for what she's done, not only for St. Catherine Drexel, but for the whole community here. And during communion, the choir is going to sing just for her, Pontis Angelicus. Is that it? Pontis Angelicus for Jean. After Mass, if you get a chance, you can come up and see these pictures of this lovely, lovely woman, but really has left her mark here, and we will not forget her, for sure. The gospel that Deacon Rick just proclaimed, the parable of the two Jewish people going to the temple to pray, the Pharisee and the tax collector. This parable was the favorite of the little flower, Thérèse of Lisieux. She loved this parable. Of course, she always prayed every day before the Blessed Sacrament in the Carmelite convent in Lisieux. So she just loved it in this parable. And if you look at it, I always say that Jesus Christ is an absolute genius, but a marvelous storyteller. And these parables are just, they're masterpieces. But if you look at it, it's just, first of all, a Pharisee. Now, St. Paul was a Pharisee. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. There's some good Pharisees, and in fact, they were Jewish people who wanted to live as perfectly as they could, to follow the law to the letter, if they possibly could. They were honest, they were clean living, they would help their neighbor. You'd want them living next to you. So really, the Pharisees were, for the most part, marvelous people. But this particular Pharisee, just follow this now. He took up his position. The Pharisee took up his position, and at the front probably, and spoke this prayer to himself, it says. Who do you pray to? You don't pray to yourself. Yeah, you pray to God. But here it says, now, he took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. Wow. Wow. So, oh God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity. Greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. Boy, he really was full of himself, huh? He really thought well of himself. He lists, I fast twice a week, I pay tithes, that's 10% on my whole income. Wow. So here's the first one now. Here's the Pharisee. Now the tax collector. He's another Jew. Jesus is Jewish and his audience is Jewish. And so the tax collector is a Jew who is a collaborator, a traitor. He's working for the Romans. The Romans are occupying Israel. They resent it, of course. They want their political freedom. And so here's a fellow who's collecting taxes for the Romans and also collecting more than he should and pocketing the extra. He was a thief as well. So you can understand why people wouldn't like, they would despise the tax collectors. So here's the contrast now. You've got the Pharisee up front giving a progress report to himself on how wonderful he is. And then this poor tax collector, this really a real sinner, he just says, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And it says this, he would not even raise his eyes to heaven. So he looked down and he kept his distance. He was at the back. Back there is not such a bad place. Back there. He kept his distance and kept his eyes down. And then it said he beat his breast and said, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And God heard that prayer. He went home justified, made right, forgiven. The Pharisee didn't. Now, I think it's so important that we realize that what we do during the Eucharist, most of it comes right out of the Scriptures. Most of it does. And I asked Deacon Rick if he would mind using today the ancient penitential rite. But if you look at it, if you look at the ancient penitential rite, it's going to say, strike your breast. There it is in red. Striking their breast through my fault, through my most grievous fault. It comes out of this gospel, folks. This is what the tax collector did. He beat his breast. It's a sign of compunction. I had to look it up. Compunction. But compunction means that we're anxious because we have a guilty conscience. We're anxious before God because our conscience isn't clean. And so, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy. Beating his breast. So that comes right out of this gospel. The only other place in the Scripture where I know where in the gospel where they beat their breasts, you remember on Good Friday when Jesus died on the cross, it said the soldiers beat their breasts, saying, "An innocent man has died. An innocent man has been put to death." So there it is, folks. And you're going to see me doing it. I do it all through the Mass. Anytime it says, "Lord, have mercy," I do that. It's very, very scriptural, very scriptural. So if you see this contrast between the Pharisee up front and the poor sinner, the tax collector down back, what's the difference? What's the difference? Well, if you notice, the Pharisee is comparing himself to other people. I'm sure he did all the things that he said. I'm sure he fasted and tithed. I'm sure he prayed 3 or 4 times a day. He followed all the letter of the law. No problem. But he compared himself to other people. And if we do that, if we think we're better, as he did with the tax collector, it leads to pride, which is not good. That's the greatest sin, right? It leads to pride. Or, if we compare ourselves to someone else and we think they're better than we are, it leads to envy and jealousy. Neither option is good. Pride or envy or jealousy, neither is good. And I think the real lesson is, do not compare yourself to anybody else. Don't do that. That's the root of so many problems when we want to know how we stand up against other people. Never compare yourself. And I had some good teachers in school, and I was number 3. Anybody who's number 3 here? And my brother was like second in his class. My sister won a scholarship. And then I came along and I flunked this and that. I flunked Latin. I flunked all this stuff. But I never had a teacher who compared me and said, well, you're not as good a student as your sister or your brother. They never did that. And that's the way it should be. Each person is unique. Each person, each one of you is a unique, magnificent manifestation of God's love. Each of us. Nobody has your fingerprints. Nobody. And God created you singularly. You were created as an individual, as a person in God's image and likeness. And so basically, be grateful for who you are. Don't ever compare yourself with anybody else. So that to me is the key. If we just did that, we would be so much happier. The Pharisee, the only word I can use that I think describes this guy, I thank God that I'm not like the rest of people. He was a snob. He was a snob. He really was a snob. And that's what it can lead to. But if we are just grateful for who we are and grateful for who everybody else is, we thank God that each person is beautifully unique, and then we can be giving praise to God that we are all brothers and sisters, the same and yet different. Isn't that beautiful? The same and yet beautifully different. So today we truly, like with Treize of Lisieux, we love this parable because it's telling us that we go to God and we don't compare ourselves with other people. We go to God, and in the presence of God, in the presence of the one who created us, the one who loves us, who sent his Son to save us, who sent their Spirit to live in us, in the presence of God, we don't say, aren't I great? We say, Lord, thank you for creating me, and give me the grace to be the person you want me to be. That's the prayer. In the words of Matthew Kelly, help me to be the best version of myself. Not the best version of somebody else, but the best version of myself. Matthew Kelly says, God already has a St. Catherine Drexel. He's already got a St. Treize of Lisieux. God needs you to be the best version of yourself. When you go to God, in his presence, it doesn't lead to pride, folks. It leads to gratitude and asking for the grace to be the person God wants you to be. Okay?